Hi guys, my name is Madison Creighton. I'm a biology major and I began to focus on the Gulf of Alaska, especially looking at the Exxon Valdez oil spill. So here are my case study questions for you guys. The first one is three types of monitoring were conducted by the Integrated Herring Research Program. Why is monitoring a good technique to use before conducting restoration of an ecosystem? The second one is what could be the harm in removing all of the minks from Prince William Sound? And the third one I wanted to ask you guys is according to the 2014 Injured Resources and Services Update, the Pacific herring and pigeon Gilmout are not recovering. Both of these programs use monitoring as a means of restoration. Is monitoring not a good technique to use, or are these species likely not recovering due to other factors? And I would like you guys to explain your answer. So I wanted to talk about the history of the Exxon oil spill. Um, it happened on March 24th, 1989, and this oil tanker was traveling around Prince William Sound, and it actually ran into a Bly reed. So when it ran into the Bly reed, it ruptured 8 out of 11 cargo tanks, all holding oil. And from these tanks, about 10.8 million gallons of crude oil was deposited into the Gulf, and that's approximately about the size of 17 Olympic swimming pools. You may be wondering, like, how did this happen? Why did it crash? And basically, the National Transportation Safety Board investigated this accident and came up with about 5 probable causes. The first one that they thought is that maybe the third mate failed to maneuver the vessel because he was tired and he had an intense workload. They also thought that the failure of the master he failed to provide a proper navigational watch. This is thought to be due because of alcohol impairment. The third one that they thought is the failure of the company to supervise the master and to make sure the crew was well rested for the trip. And then it's also the failure of the Coast Guard to provide an effective vessel traffic system. And lastly, the lack of effective pilot and escort services. So all of those contributed to the crash. So because there was 10.8 million gallons of crude oil spilled, there was a lot of impacts that happened. Specifically, more than 1,300 miles of shoreline were affected. As you can see here in one of the pictures, all of this is the oil around here. You can see it in the water. There was also a lot of deaths of species. Approximately 250,000 shorebirds, 2,800 sea otters, 300 harbor seals, 250 bald eagles, 22 killer whales, and also billions of fish, including salmon and herring, which we'll talk about herring here in a second. So, because there was a lot of oil spilled, there are multiple restoration projects. You can actually go to the Exxon Valdez Trustee Council site and you can look at some of the restoration projects. But the main three that I'm going to focus on in this presentation is how did they clean up the oil, the long-term herring research and monitoring program, and then the Pigeon Gilmout restoration research. So, how did they clean up the oil? So, the first initial step was actually physically washing the Gulf. And in the picture over here on the right, you can see that they're using these big pumps and hoses to physically wash the water out of the oil. Or, excuse me, wash the oil out of the water. So here they're all doing that. And then after they physically washed everything, there was still some oil on the beaches, specifically in like the sand and the gravel areas. So with that, they used bioremediation. And if you can recall from Dr. Campbell's earlier lectures this semester, that is the use of microorganisms or other forms of life to break down environmental pollutants and consume them. So in these beach areas, in the sand and gravel areas, they had, I don't want to say like they estimated, they had previous knowledge that there was microorganisms that could degrade oil in those contaminated areas. So to make them flourish, they added fertilizers to the soil, and then this provided them with nutrients and allowed them to grow and break down the oil. All right. The next one I'm going to talk about is the long-term herring research and monitoring. So the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Trustee Council that I talked about earlier, they recruited scientists, researchers, commercial and subsistence fishermen, and then natural resource managers. And together they formed the Integrated Herring Restoration Program, or the IHRP. The goal of this program was basically to determine what can be done to restore the Prince William Sound herring. And in this program, they did 3 types of monitoring. So they did that of recruitment, top down, and then herring population. And then this monitoring research allowed them to plan for the future and to figure out what they can be done, or what they can do, excuse me. All right. The last one I'm going to talk about is the Pigeon Gilmout restoration research in Prince William Sound. This was a 5-year ongoing project. It consisted of trapping predators, they did census counts of the population, and then they monitored the overall productivity. So from 2014 to 2016, they trapped minks in the specific Naked Island group. From trapping those minks, they saw an increase in the population. Specifically in the summer of 2015, they had over 90 pigeons that year, and that was 74 more than the previous year. So I would say it's a pretty good increase. After they removed those minks, they used monitoring to calculate the response and success of the restoration project. Here you can see those pigeon guillemots and how cute they are. So what are the benefits of doing oil restoration? So Alaska has a lot of tourism. I want to go to Alaska. I've never been there, but I would love to go. They do have a lot of cruises and a lot of hiking and a lot of things that you can do in Alaska. But after that spill, tourism and recreation decreased dramatically. I can see why. Who would want to go to Alaska when the ecosystem's covered in oil and all the animals are dying? Like, I wouldn't want to go do that. But so some benefits of restoring this program is that tourism and recreation industries will increase. They will get back to where they were and maybe even farther. Some specific things that would be beneficial is that 1 out of 9 jobs in Anchorage, Alaska are in tourism. So that's a lot of jobs. Another thing is that tourists contribute about $38 million in hotel and car rental taxes. They contribute $297 million on top of their payments for cruises and airfare. And then overall local businesses would just improve. So those are some benefits of restoring the ecosystem. For the herring restoration benefits, they are also going to be economic. Herring fishing is a big commercial business. There are a lot of fishermen and it's used for a lot of things. So as we'll see, subsistence fisheries are a big thing in Alaska. And specifically with subsistence fisheries, dried herring is a traditional staple in the diet of Bering Sea villages there. So restoring that population will definitely help the culture of those sea villages and stuff like that. And then commercial fishing would be benefited because herring is used for human consumption. It's also used for bait and reduction, which is the production of fish meal and fish oil. And then there's also a lot of harvesting of the herring eggs on kelp for those fisheries. They harvest about 300 tons annually, and that approximately equates to $2.5 million for those fishermen who harvest them. So if the herring is restored, the economy will increase. So, restoration outcomes. The recovery objects have been met for some of the species, but not all of them, and restoration is far from complete. From the Exxon oil cleanup, there was a 2015 oil survey shows that oil still remains in the region. From this study, they looked at 9 beaches, and 8 of them surveyed that they had enriched concentrations of toxins, so there was still oil present in majority of the area. From the Exxon Valdez Trustee Council website, it shows that the Pacific herring and the pigeon guillemots are not recovering. With the Pacific herring specifically, the population is not increasing. It's at a standstill. Part of this may be due to the fact that they opened the fisheries a little early, and therefore the population never was able to recover, as well as they are looking at 2 different types of diseases that are affecting the fish. So that is another reason why they could not be recovering. For the pigeon guillemots, the study showed that the population had actually decreased by 57% 3 years after the spill, and they are still not recovering. So the SER attributes of restoration, the whole restoration project of the Exxon Valdez oil spill doesn't really fit any of the categories because there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. So the physical environment of the restored ecosystem is capable of sustaining reproducing populations of the species necessary for its continued stability or development along the desired trajectory. I put this as an X because none of the species are reproducing, the populations are not steady. The 5th one, the restored ecosystem apparently functions normally for its ecological state of development and signs of dysfunction are absent. This is clearly a no because the ecosystem is not repaired and there's a lot of dysfunction still. Number 7, potential threats to the health and integrity of the restored ecosystem from the surrounding landscape have been eliminated or reduced as much as possible. As you can see in this presentation, the herring is not recovering, the pigeon guillemot is not recovering, and there's still oil. So those potential threats have not been eliminated or reduced as much as possible. And number 8, the restored ecosystem is sufficiently resilient to endure the normal periodic stress events in the local environment that serve to maintain the integrity of the ecosystem. I also marked this as failed because the ecosystem is not sufficiently resilient to endure normal periodic stress. Here is my works cited. Thank you guys for listening.